Hello Game Boys and Game Girls, I'm the Game Boy Guru, and welcome to the first in a new series of videos that I'm going to call What I'm Playing. Simple but effective. This is a basic series where I'll be just doing occasional videos talking about the games that I'm playing, some of which will be Game Boy games, of course, for my review project, but also some of those will be other games for other systems, some retro, some modern. It'll kind of range the spectrum all over the place. So I'll bounce around from system to system because I like to do that and shake things up. Although you will see certain systems more focused in from time to time. So let's get started. First, I might as well talk about the Game Boy games I've been playing recently. First and foremost, we'll talk about the Castlevania Adventure. And this is one that I owned as a child. For those of you who have read the initial post on my Game Boy Guru review blog, gameboyguru.blogspot.com. If you haven't, you'll know that I tell the story about the fact that this game was one of the first Game Boy games I ever owned. In fact, it was technically the first non-pack-in game I owned, or the first game I owned other than Tetris, because I wanted a Game Boy. My parents said that I had to buy the Game Boy myself, and they would buy me a game for my birthday. So I dutifully saved all my allowance money and money I got doing other things, and gave them the money. They went and bought the Game Boy, and then they gave it to me along with this game for my birthday when I was, I believe, 13. Had to have been my 13th birthday. In any event, I spent hours poring over this game and really getting a lot out of it, enjoying it. Really thought it was great. Awesome music, good graphics, etc. Having gone back to the game now in recent months, it's not as good as I remember it. I've kind of been a bit of a defender of this game over the years, and I see why everybody hates on it so much. It is indeed incredibly slow. Some of the pixel-perfect jumps that you're required to do are pretty bad, and I don't want to say unfair, but just there's too many of them. And there are too many areas where, because of the traditional lack of maneuverability that you have with the Belmont character, in this case Christopher Belmont, the inability to change direction in the middle of a jump or things like that, you find that there are a lot of areas where there are seemingly cheap deaths. But the soundtrack still holds up. It's still amazing. Great music for the Game Boy, fantastic stereo separation. Certainly one of the best soundtracks among early titles, if not one of the best soundtracks among the entire Game Boy library. Many of the flaws of this game were rectified later by the second game, Castlevania II Belmont's Revenge, and I look forward to covering that game at some point. But in the meantime, I can't say that I would recommend this to anyone but the most ardent Castlevania fans, those who like a stiff challenge, or those who are just looking for good examples of good use of the Game Boy hardware early on. I will say, though, that the game is not impossible. I beat it as a kid after months of trying, and in just a few days leading up to writing the review, I was able to get back to the area in the fourth and final stage where I died the most as a kid. Some of it's muscle memory, some of it's just remembering where the pitfalls and the traps are that you have to avoid, but it's not as super hard, I think, as some people make it out to be, but it does have its flaws for sure. Next up is Cosmo Tank. This was published by Atlas, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head. I just did a review of this game, so if you want to go check out the Castlevania Adventure review and this review for Cosmo Tank, again, check out my blog, gameboyguru.blogspot.com. I would like to eventually get a domain for that, but I just haven't done it yet. Anyway, I'll put a link in the description below, but CosmoTank by Atlas, published by Atlas, it was developed by another independent studio. The name escapes me, and I can't really find any of the credits that they did, which is a shame because there's a lot of potential here. It's a, I would say, a good game that's got some major flaws. It could have been a great game. Case in point, the graphics are really good. It's got really good graphic design, both in the overhead stages. I guess I should preface that by saying this game takes place in multiple areas. You start out, you're playing or driving around this Cosmo Tank, and you start out in sort of an overhead view, running around, shooting aliens or enemies or whatever, and gaining power-ups so that you can effectively level up the tank so that it's more powerful. And then throughout the course of the game, you find different bases that either refill your health, give you upgrades, give you information, and then of course at the end of each level after you've defeated the final boss, you'll find a base that will then allow you to get off of that planet and travel to a different planet. And so you've got your overhead portions where you run around, power up your tank, etc. Then you'll find caves, caverns, and things like that where you go in to sort of a first-person dungeon crawler type of mode. And you kind of go through those screen by screen, and then when you encounter an enemy, you'll get a targeting reticle on the screen, and you can pan left and right and turn your cannon, your tank turret all the way around, so that you can fire 360 and allow you to track that enemy and take it out. When you're done fighting that enemy, the turret swings back to whatever direction you were facing in, and you keep going. And you have to take out these power cores in each base, and then take out the life core, or the boss, essentially, for that planet. And then when you do that, then you have the ability to move on to the next planet. And when you do that, then it turns into a scrolling shooter section, vertical scrolling shooter, where you blast enemies as you're going from planet to planet to try to take out the mad scientist who has created all this chaos and destruction. Really good graphics in the overhead sections and the first-person sections especially. Decent graphics in the shoot 'em up sections, with kind of a cool effect that you see when you blow up meteorites. Good soundtrack. There's not a ton of music in the game, but it's got really good music for what it is. And there's so much potential here, but a lot of it is squandered by some poor design choices. For one, the game is long enough and difficult enough that I think a password system would have been a really good idea, because there are 6 planets in the game. The initial planet that you start with, and then there are 4 additional planets that you can choose the order in which you visit them, although there's a bit of linearity because a couple of the planets you can't really traverse until you hit a certain planet first to get an upgrade to the tank that allows you to then pass certain hazards. But it's a really promising game that there's still fun to be had. I enjoyed my time with it. I was initially very frustrated by it, in part because if you die and you allow your tank to run out of energy, then your only hope of defeating a boss without it taking 15 minutes is going back out into the overhead sections and grinding for power-ups again, because your tank goes back down to no power-ups. Now, in shooter games, this is common, but in a lot of those games, it's about learning patterns, where on the screen to go as a safe area so that you can avoid certain obstacles or fire patterns and things like that. That's normal. In this game, however, because you have a constant barrage of enemies in the overhead section, so there's really no safe place to be, and because in the first-person sections, once you get to the boss, there's really just that boss's pattern that you have to learn, and so there really isn't the ability to get that kind of reprieve. So, yeah, wasted potential. It's still an interesting game though, and it definitely is worth checking out, but I can't wholeheartedly recommend it. And just within the last week, I started playing Disney's Hercules, and this will be the next review that I am working on. So I'm actually working on getting through the game now. I played a bunch of levels, not last night, but the night before, and have several passwords so I can kind of get back to where I was. But interesting game. My initial thoughts on it, and I'll say this, I'll preface this by saying I have no experience with the film that it's based on. I've never seen the Disney Hercules movie. I only have knowledge of Hercules through my interest in Greek mythology when I was in grade school, and then later watching the Hercules TV show that was on in the 90s. But it's an interesting game. I didn't like it at first because I was a little confused by the design and some of the design choices that they made and a couple of the quirks with the game. I've since come to kind of appreciate it more, and I'll tentatively say that I like it. I haven't got far enough into the game yet to know how much or at what level, but pretty interesting. I'll definitely have lots to say about this when it comes time to write my review. Now we'll move on to some stuff I've been playing on my trusty Wii U. For those who follow me on Twitter, and if you don't, you can follow me at GameBoyGuru. You'll know that I have been enjoying my Wii U console a lot over the last couple of years. I've had one now for almost 3 years, and I think I've put more time into my Wii U than any other system I have over the last probably 5 years. And I say that being a big fan of the PSP and having put a lot of time into that, having put a fairly significant amount of time into my PS3, as well as, of course, lots of time with Game Boy games and loads of time with NES and Sega Genesis and that sort of thing. So I've really enjoyed my Wii U console. And my wife got me for Christmas Star Fox Zero. Of course, I got the full package with the box that includes Star Fox Guard. Haven't put any time into that yet, but I do intend to at some point. It looks to be more of a sort of a strategy game than this. But of course, this has kind of got mixed reviews. I'm not a big Star Fox person. You know, I sort of enjoyed the first game as a kid when I played it a couple times at friends' houses, but other than being blown away by the sort of shiny newness of 3D at the time, and you know, kind of how different it was from everything that we had seen thus far. You know, I didn't become a big Star Fox fan, and I think the only other game in the series I own is Star Fox 64, and I haven't really put much time into that. But this I quite enjoyed. I know some people complain about the control scheme. It is unique and it is difficult to get used to. The first boss encounter took me forever because I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I best pay attention to what's on the TV screen, but then also pay attention to, you know, the gamepad as I'm holding it and, you know, trying to use that to aim and all of that. It's a very different way to play the game, but I found that refreshing. Once I got past the sort of goofiness of that and kind of learned how to exploit that, then I started to really enjoy the game. And once I got past that first boss encounter, I flew through most of the game pretty quickly, and I rather enjoyed myself. I don't want to say it's an easy game. It's not. And it was designed by Platinum, who have designed a couple of my favorite games on the Wii U, that being The Wonderful 101, which is the most criminally underrated game on the system, and of course Bayonetta 2, which most everyone who's played it has raved about, rightfully so, because it's a fantastic game. But as far as Star Fox Zero, is it a remake or a reimagining of Star Fox 64? Yeah, maybe. But I thought it was a good game. I like some of the interesting things they did with the gamepad, not just with the aiming, but also when you go into your in between level portions where you get the sort of minor mission briefing. The mission briefing comes through the speakers on the gamepad rather than through the TV. And when you're in a level and you're getting radio chatter from your fellow pilots like Slippy and Falco and all that, it's all through the speakers on the gamepad. And so I kind of like that. It is a nice touch and a nice way to utilize the gamepad for more than just the aiming in that second screen. There are some additional things with the second screen that are cool, like you get to drop down a little sort of drone that then you use that second screen to sort of walk around and find your way through corridors and stuff to hit buttons or shut off switches and things like that. So a little bit of puzzle solving element in the game, not too much, but enough to kind of keep it fresh and so it's not all dogfighting all the time. So that was fun. And anyway, the thing that tripped me up the most was the second encounter with the Gigarilla. That took me weeks to figure out. And I say weeks, I mean, over the course of several weeks when I'd play it for 30 minutes here and 20 minutes there and an hour over here, it took me forever to take down that boss because I would sort of chip away at it and make progress, and then I would fail. And then the next time I'd go back to it, I would just utterly fail. And so I don't know if I wasn't in the right mindset or what. But anyway, good game. It was fun. And if you're a Star Fox fan at all with a Wii U, I would recommend checking it out because I had a lot of fun with it. And I'm not even a Star Fox fan in that classic sense. The other game I've been working on more recently is ZombiU. Now, this is one of the first games I got for the Wii U. My wife bought it when she bought me the Wii U for Christmas here about 3 years ago. She bought me the Super Mario Brothers U, Luigi U bundle. Plus, she bought me ZombiU, Wonderful 101, and Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympics. Was it Sochi? I don't remember. Anyway, so I played this game relatively early when I started playing the system, but I kind of got stuck, and so I didn't go back to it right away. Well, I decided, you know what, I had fun with this the first time, despite kind of getting stuck early on, and I wanted to try again. So I deleted my save and I started over, and within a very short time, I progressed way further than I did on my first attempt. And I haven't picked this up in a little while because I've been concentrating on my Game Boy games and also a couple of other things which I'll show you. But it's not perfect. There are some things about it I don't like, such as one thing I like but don't like is when you die, you don't respawn. You become a zombie. So then you play the game as someone else, and you have to try and go back and, if you can, find your corpse so that you can kill zombie you, or the previous version of you, of your playable character who is now a zombie, and get back your backpack so you can get the items that you had. You don't lose special items that are things that you have to progress. I didn't know that when I first got one. For example, you need a lockpick to open a gate that is outside of Buckingham Palace, so that you can actually make your way into the palace and get to the armory, so that you can try to more heavily arm yourself. And so after I got the lockpick and then proceeded to quickly die, I spent a ton of time trying to figure out how to find my old corpse, or I went back to the place where you get the lockpick and was like, where is this? Well, it turns out that there's sort of a passive online element to the game. There's an online component, but it's also passive online. So if you die in the game and then you go back to find your corpse and somebody else who's playing finds your zombie self before you do, they can kill your previous zombified character and take your stuff. So it's kind of like an online game such as Diablo 2 or 3, where if you die and then your body's there and you're in a party, they can loot your corpse and take your stuff if they're not very nice. Now in this game, of course, it's all very sparse, so you're not going to see that other player because they're playing in their own little world. But if they get to that area of the game before you get back to it, they can kill ZombiU, hence the name, and take your stuff. And then you're left to scrounge and try to find other players who have died in some of the trouble spots and kill them off and take their stuff out of their bag. So it's an interesting element that works reasonably well, but it can be a bit frustrating. Also, the fact that when you die, you always start out at the safe room, or like the compound that you start the game at, is a little frustrating. Yeah, you can use the sewers to get directly to, certain areas quickly, but it's a little frustrating that you always go right back to the safe house or compound, and then have to backtrack, and kind of waste a little bit of time rather than going to whatever the most recent sort of save room is that you started at. I get why they do that, because there's actually a chest or storage piece in the compound that you can stockpile items and stuff at. So if you're smart, which I haven't been thus far, you can gather a bunch of stuff and then take it back to the safe room and stockpile it there, so that when you start in your next character, then you can immediately grab all that stuff and get it in your bag, so that you're not starting out with just the cricket bat and 6 bullets in your gun, kind of a thing, because that becomes progressively harder as the game goes on. But I am enjoying it. It's very, very atmospheric. Loads of atmosphere in the game, and so it's just, and it is genuinely creepy. And I am not someone who is a big fan of zombie movies. I've never been a Dawn of the Dead kind of guy. I prefer other lore versus zombie lore in general. But this is really atmospheric and genuinely creepy, and I have to recommend it. I know that there's the just Zombie now for the PS4, and I don't know if it's out for Xbox One. So Ubisoft has this is no longer a console exclusive, but the tie-in with the gamepad is absolutely fantastic for inventory management, for using the prepper pad that you'll see in the game. It's sort of like a tablet computer that the guy who's helping you and radioing you gives you to use to help scan areas for loot that you can grab, infected zombies and stuff, so you kind of know how many are out there. And so it's a very interesting game that I have to recommend for Wii U owners looking for something a bit more mature, a bit more traditional maybe, versus some of the more kiddie fare, I guess you could say, that's on the Wii U. But when I say traditional, I mean, in terms of the theme, but non-traditional because it has that extra element of really well utilized controls with the gamepad. And finally, I'd like to close out with a couple of Xbox 360 games. Um, I've had this one for a while, kind of been working on it off and on, playing it casually, not really being super serious with it, but that's Raiden 4. Now I know Raiden 4 Overkill has been out in digital form on the PS3 that has some, I don't know, improvements or changes with this. And I'm not big on digital downloads. I much prefer physical. And I specifically bought this. This was actually the GameStop version of the game, which was exclusive to them. There's a standard release that just comes with the game, but this is one that comes with not only the game, but also the soundtrack. And I've always enjoyed the soundtrack in the Raiden games. And for those unfamiliar, actually, the first two Raiden games got a release on the original PlayStation during it. I don't know if it was during the launch window or sometime after that, but it was a long box release in the plastic long box, similar to what came out with the Sega Saturn. And that had Raiden 1 and 2. It was called the Raiden Project, and it had not only the original arcade releases with the original soundtrack, but then it also had sort of an arranged soundtrack. And so you could go into the sound test and listen to the full soundtrack for Raiden and Raiden 2, and then arranged soundtracks for Raiden and Raiden 2, which were really good. And so having the soundtrack for Raiden 4 is awesome. I've actually probably spent more time listening to the soundtrack than I have playing the game because I've made a CDR copy of it so I can keep it in the car and keep this one in the case. And I've been listening to it for months. And anyway, it's a challenging game. It's definitely better than Raiden 3. Raiden 3 on the PS3 was a bit of a disappointment because they kind of neutered the toothpaste laser, if you will, or the plasma laser. So instead of honing in on enemies and then sort of sticking to them and then sort of fishtailing out to multiple enemies, it was just sort of this wave that you could do, and it really wasn't all that useful. This kind of gives you the ability to use both the original plasma laser from Raiden 2, but also sort of a modified version of that where it shoots out 3 streams in that sort of pattern, or well, I can't really do it with my fingers, but that sort of trident pattern, if you will, and then sort of wave it around so that they kind of cut a swath across the playing field. So it kind of gives you that in-between effect between the really strong forward blue laser that only shoots forward and gets just very little wave when you move around, and the Vulcan cannon, which has that huge spread that you can achieve, but is far less powerful than the laser. There is DLC for the game that I haven't purchased yet. I know there's, excuse me, additional planes that you can get with the game that allow you to play, I think, maybe the original ship from the first game or from Raiden 2, and one other craft, I believe, that you can get. I haven't looked into it that much, and I haven't purchased it, so like I say, I don't know that much about it. But I've been enjoying it. I've been using the Tekken, I think it's a Tekken 6 arcade stick that I got at Goodwill for like $6. I'd like to eventually swap out the buttons on that for some nice Sanwa buttons and maybe a nicer stick. But in the meantime, I've just been enjoying the game for what it is. Big shmup fan, so I was glad to have that. And last but not least, you saw this, you may have seen this in a recent pickups video, and that is TiemShift for the Xbox 360. Kind of been working on this over the last couple of weeks. This is a kind of a cool game, interesting deal. Not entirely original, but it's a first-person shooter where you are a physicist and you are working on this project where you're making this suit that you can see here, where that allows you to manipulate time, and it's called the Beta suit. And the lead scientist on the project, Dr. Crone, through a series of events, gets power mad and um, takes over the alpha suit, or the first iteration of the suit, and makes a time jump and effectively goes back in time and then changes the future so that the World War II era, if you will, becomes very technologically advanced or what have you. And so then you've got these cool sort of steampunk-esque, highly technological, or I should say steampunk-inspired, but highly technological flying dirigibles and interesting lightweight planes and things like that, but with big turrets on them and you know, heavy machine guns and things, stuff that you wouldn't have found quite the same way during that era. Anyway, so then your goal is to jump back in time, find Crone, and take him out. And so you, with the beta suit, you have the ability to pause time briefly, slow time, or reverse time. And so throughout the game, there are a number of puzzles that you have to solve that require the use of either pausing, slowing, or reversing time. For example, there's one area, I want to say relatively early on, where you're in sort of a warehouse or whatever, and there's a switch that you can pull, or a lever you can pull, that will move a platform one direction, and then you can pull it again and move it the other. So in one instance, or in one of these instances, you pull the lever to bring the platform over to you, then you pull the lever again and immediately slow time, so you've got enough time to step over and jump onto that platform as it's pulling away. Then you can unpause time and let the platform take you where it's supposed to go. In another instance, there's an elevator that you can only use the button to bring it down to you, and then when you step on the elevator, it goes up, or maybe it's, I don't remember. Anyway, there's no control inside the elevator, it's only outside. So what you have to do is bring the elevator down to you, then quickly run over to the elevator and reverse time so it will go back up, and then you can step off onto the platform above. There are a couple of flaws in the game. The jumping mechanic is not very good. You don't jump very high. So unlike a game, you know, earlier FPS like Duke Nukem 3D, where jumping is very involved, but generally you can get good results with it. This game, I found the jumping to be a little bit fiddly, and of course the way it's laid out, it's very linear, so it guides you pretty specifically along the path that you're supposed to take, both with the radar that you have that shows an indicator of where you're supposed to go, but also the way that the levels are laid out. There are specific obstacles that you can't overcome. But there are some cool things in it, like it uses the sort of Red Faction style destructible environments in some places. There are some things that you can destroy. You know, there are a number of places where there are these red, I don't know if they're oxygen tanks or fuel tanks or whatever, but anytime you see a red tank or a red barrel, you can shoot it, it'll blow up, and then other stuff will blow up near it. With the army that Crone has amassed, you have to take out his soldiers and fight along with the opposition force, which is like just the general populace trying to gain freedom from Crone, since he's taken over this entire timeline. And you can use those situations to sometimes take out enemy trucks and things like that, and or groups of enemies. If you find them congregating near something like that, you can shoot one and then blow them all up, and you know, make getting through that area easier. But I like the fact that the controls aren't perfect either. When you move with your targeting reticle with the right analog stick, it seems to be very quick. And so there are times when you've got to be real precise, and even if you're zoomed in, it's hard to do that in some instances. unless you get real brave and get much closer to the target. But overall, I found the game to be fun. The weapons are fun to use, especially when you get toward the end, and you get a couple of really cool weapons. Like there's a fun rocket launcher that you can use, and a really cool gun. Most of the guns have dual fire capabilities, so there's a machine gun that's secondary fires like a grenade launcher. There's a cool gun later on that is sort of almost like a machine gun flamethrower. It shoots out these sort of flaming rounds that after you get 3, 4, 5 of them into an enemy, the enemy goes on fire. But then the secondary fire is literally a flamethrower. So if you're within a few feet, you can just totally torch them. One of the most fun weapons in the game, though, is the crossbow, because you shoot out these explosive arrows, and so when you shoot that explosive arrow, after a couple of seconds, it blows up. And usually, with most enemies, you can take them out with a single arrow if you attach the arrow or shoot it at them and it sticks. It will blow them up in one hit. And so that's a lot of fun to use, especially when you go into a section, there's a bunch of enemies there. You can quickly slow time and then zoom in with your crossbow and boom, 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 boom. And suddenly you've got 3 or 4 enemies that you've used the crossbow to target. And then if time runs out or you unpause, you can then unzoom you can take off the zoom on the crossbow and quickly watch these 4 enemies blow up in rapid succession, and take cover again so that you can wait for your beta suit to recharge and give you the ability to do it again. So I had fun with that mechanic. The last boss encounter is really hard, and I actually had to go online to figure out how to avoid the missile salvos in order to beat it. Once I did, within about 5 or 6 tries, I was able to beat it. So the actual campaign is not all that long. I imagine people that paid $60 for this when they first got it were maybe a little disappointed that the game wasn't longer. But I had fun with it, and obviously for $4 or $5 at the pawn shop, it was definitely worth picking up and playing through. So I enjoyed that. That's all I've got. I'm going to be working on some additional Game Boy games, of course, for my review project, and I may go back to a couple of original PlayStation classics here during the next few weeks. And so next time I have a video, hopefully I'll have a little bit more variety for you. That's all I've got. Thanks for playing, and game on.